Hey, Jessica, thanks so much for joining me today.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you so much.
I'm really excited to chat with you because obviously we've all been hearing a lot about tariffs, and you wrote an article called
Mhm.
Trump's Tariffs Are Incoherent and Destructive, which I feel like the headline gives quite a bit away in terms of your opinion on these tariffs. But could you talk about what the White House is getting so wrong with the tariffs that they're trying to implement?
The White House is getting everything wrong on the tariffs. It's unclear what the actual reason Trump is so hostile to international trade is. I know that since the 1980s, he has been harshly critical of international trade, but he ends up backfilling all these really silly arguments that are contradictory and don't make any sense. For instance, Trump treats trade deficits like they're a subsidy. He says our $200 billion trade deficit with Canada means we're subsidizing $200 billion a year to Canada. Well, first off, it's $64 billion, one third the size. But a trade deficit just means they're buying more of our stuff than we're buying of theirs, and then they're taking the extra $64 billion and investing it in our economy. They're using it to buy our treasury debt to keep interest rates low. I mean, I run a trade deficit with the grocery store. It's not a harmful thing. Trump seems to see the word deficit and think bad, when in reality, we buy more items from other countries because we have a really healthy, fast-growing economy with consumers who want to buy more things. And because we don't save enough money, we need that international investment in order to finance our investment. It's not a bad thing just because it has the word deficit in it.
Yeah. Some people are talking about we need to reframe deficit into like an import surplus, but a trade deficit is a capital surplus. Could
It's
you
a
explain
capital
that?
surplus.
Yeah.
Exactly. We should just start referring to a trade deficit as a capital surplus.
You would love
See,
that.
see President Trump react really confused.
Could you explain how it is a capital surplus? Like I know you talked about like, the money gets spent. Could you just explain the mechanics of that?
Right. So if we buy $100, let's say we buy $100 import from Canada. Canada now has 100 US dollars. What are they going to do with 100 US dollars? It's not really something they can use a lot in Canada. So either they're going to buy our exports, or if they're not going to buy our exports, they're going to reinvest the money in the American economy by maybe buying a treasury bond, investing it somewhere in the economy, lending it to someone. The point is, the dollars that we send to Canada are of no use by themselves to the Canadians. So eventually the dollars are going to find their way back into the United States, either buying our goods or purchasing our investments. And that's why economists always say that the balance of international payments must net to zero. The dollars that go out are going to come back one way or another.
Yeah. No, it does seem like there's misunderstandings across the board from what a deficit is to what tariffs actually do and who pays for them. And, Trump ran on this platform of improving the economy. And so when you look at the misunderstandings that are happening just in the first 80 days of the presidency, do you worry that Trump will leave the economy worse off in 4 years than when he inherited it?
It looks a lot worse so far.
Yeah.
Let's go back to 2017 first. Trump got elected this time around because he was seen as this economic genius, because we had a growing economy in 2017, 2018, and 2019 before the pandemic hit. What I like to remind people is Trump in 2017 inherited economy that was already in the middle of an expansion. And then he added trillions in tax cuts and spending stimulus to an economy that was already growing. That's not genius. Anybody can inherit a growing economy and then cut a bunch of taxes, increase spending, and see it continue growing for 2 more years. The economy he's inheriting today, is much more challenging. We have inflation. We've had some sluggishness. And his policies are so much more destructive. These tariffs are so much larger than what we saw during the first term. So when you inherit a little more of a questionable economy and your policies are so much more destructive, now you see the stock market cratering, job layoffs. We're probably going to have higher prices. A lot of investment firms in New York are saying we have about a 50-50 shot at being in a recession within the next month or two if we're not already in one. I think it's really hard to make an argument that Trump is some economic growth genius when he just inherited it last time, and this time he seems to be actively driving what was a growing economy into the ground. Hopefully, he has time. He will turn these policies around. He'll continue pulling back the tariffs, and we can revert to a normal economy. I don't know, though.
I mean, the Treasury market has shown that they're not too pleased with these tariffs. So what do you think is going to be the thing that stops him? Or is there anything that stops this train that we're all on?
Ultimately, Trump doesn't listen to a lot of people. He doesn't listen to advisors. He really doesn't seem to listen to voters. But he does seem heavily influenced by the stock market and the bond market. And part of that is because Trump's brand has been, I'll make you rich. I'll make you rich. You're going to have so much money you don't know what to do with. He always criticized Biden for bad stock market performance. I'm going to make you rich. In that situation, if the stock market is falling 20%, Trump is losing his entire justification. Trump is not going to transition his rhetoric to here's why we all need to sacrifice. No, he is entirely pure political id. I'm going to make you rich. He can't handle having the stock market collapse under his watch. Similarly, when the bond market panicked last week, the 10-year and 30-year Treasury started rising. That got Trump's attention in ways that other reactions haven't. So if you're looking for what can change Trump's opinion on this stuff, look at the stock market and look at the bond market.
Yeah. No, it seems like the bond market is definitely the final arbiter of truth. Yeah, he's come out a couple of times and is like, I don't care about stocks. But once the bond market started,
he should care about stocks, though, because like I said, if Trump's not making you rich, then what's the point? That's his only argument is I might be a jerk, but I'm going to make you rich.
Yeah. Well, and this goes back to what is his goal here? A lot of people will say that the tariffs are for unfair trading practices, but you don't necessarily agree with that, right? Why is he doing this?
He will say it's for unfair trade practices, but the original tariffs that were announced 2 weeks ago weren't at all based on unfair trade practices. The tariff rates were determined by how large of a trade deficit we have with countries, not whether or not they had tariffs against us. And this goes back to an article I read by Scott Lincecum in the Dispatch last week, which mentioned that even if you go all the way back to the 80s, when Trump was a real estate developer in New York, he was hostile to international trade on principle. Any international trade was bad. This may be a result of the kill or be killed world of real estate where every deal is win or lose. It may have been concerns about foreign competition buying up buildings. But for whatever reason, Trump said in an interview last week that his goal for trade reform is for the U.S. to be running a trade surplus with every country in the world, which is an absurd goal. And it's a virtually impossible goal. We're not going to run a trade deficit with a trade surplus with the poorest African countries. It's absurd, but that seems to be where he's going with his rhetoric.
Yeah, we can't expect Cambodia to be able to afford to purchase U.S. goods, which would be required to close that trade deficit, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. You need Cambodia to start purchasing as much of our stuff as we purchase from them. There's small countries in Africa that have virtually no money, but they export us diamonds. We're not going to spend all of that money. As much as we buy diamonds, we're not going to spend on, they're not going to buy from us that much. They don't have the money. it's kind of an absurd economic theory, and I'm telling you, economists are pulling our hair out because it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I know. Many economists. I've spoken to Erica York at the Tax Foundation quite a bit, and she's just like, "Oh my gosh."
I know. I feel bad for Erica every day.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Like just keeping up with the constant changes too. And he's doing all of this under emergency action. So Congress could step in at any time. Why do you think they're not? Is it just to kind of appease his power?
Congress is scared of him. I work with Congress every day. I talk to Republican and Democratic congressional leaders frequently. And I can tell you that Republican lawmakers are horrified by the tariffs. A lot of them are free traders at heart. They, earlier in their career, before Trump spoke out, they supported free trade. And moreover, they're terrified of what's happening in their district. They're terrified of the backlash. They don't want to go into re-election with a recession, collapsing stock market, rising prices, and they're nervous. But at the same time, they won't speak out because they believe that if they say anything, Trump is going to start attacking them. He's going to fund a primary. And even if most of the voters are on their side, they still may not be able to win a Republican primary if they speak out against Trump. Not exactly a profile in courage going on in Congress right now. You have a lot of members of Congress who are allowing their constituents to suffer because they don't want to offend the president.
Yeah. No, it's absurd to watch. And you're seeing sentiment really, really dip from people as they are concerned. And I think
and the surveys on tariffs, there was a survey this morning on CNN that said 66% of independents are upset with the tariffs. Yeah. There was a Gallup poll that said support for international trade is now at the highest level they've ever recorded. If anything, Trump is uniting voters in favor of free trade.
And so this might be a tough question to answer, but if we have a president who isn't listening to Congress and isn't listening to the voters, what sort of, what's going on? Do we have a democracy at that point?
We have a democracy in that we're stuck with the guy for 4 years. He was elected duly. We're stuck with him. But it's certainly not a democracy where the voice of the voters seems to matter more than one day every 2 to 4 years, which is very awkward. It's also not a democracy in the manner of Congress giving up their own power. You know, when you look back at the founders, Madison believed that we would have each branch fighting for power against each other and trying to grab power, and that would check each other. But instead, the real split in Washington is by party, not by branch. So if one party controls each branch, the branches aren't checking each other anymore. The branches are all working together, sometimes against the voters, to empower the chief executive. So you end up without the checks and balances Madison wanted. Instead of the Congress fighting the president, it's the Republicans with somewhat unchecked power and a really compliant Congress that doesn't even want the authority to represent their constituents on this issue. It's actually really confusing for those who study the founders.
Yeah. How did we get here? Is it just nobody wanted to mess with Trump because he's so scary? They just want to hold the power that they do have?
Very different. You know, I'm old. I remember the 80s and the 90s when even Republican presidents were terrified of old bull Republican committee chairs in Congress. And even Democratic presidents could be brought to their knees by Democratic committee chairmen. You know, Dan Rostenkowski had the power to basically kill Clinton care. He was the Democratic chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. Congress had its own prerogatives, and the lawmakers were not hesitant to offend presidents of their own party. It's just very different today. Politics has become so nationalized that the president is the cultural symbol of political dominance. So everything is filtered up and all the focus goes to the president. And members of Congress run essentially to be cheerleaders or critics of the president. Very different from when I was, becoming politically active in the 80s and 90s.
And that wasn't even that long ago. Like, what has changed in the past couple of decades to make this how it is?
It's the permanent campaign. It's also, you have factors like media segmentation, which is kind of putting voters in partisan echo chambers where, again, everything revolves around the presidency. And if you're a member of Congress, the only thing that really matters is, are you going to support and oppose the president? It's not, what are you going to do for your constituents? It's ticket splitting has gone away. Republican districts, which are gerrymandered to be very Republican, vote for Republican presidents and Republican members of Congress to support the president. Gerrymandered Democratic districts do the same on the Democratic side. And it's distressing to see Congress not taking back its authority.
Yeah, and even giving it away. Like, I think in the budget plan, they were like, no, we're going to pass the power of tariffs to the president, right?
Yes. And in fact, they've actually taken away their ability to stop tariffs. And at this point, the only way to stop tariffs would be to pass a bill canceling them. And then when the president vetoes that bill, you need 2/3 to overcome the veto. It used to be the case that a congressional majority could block tariffs and the president couldn't stop them, but they repealed the process that would allow themselves to kill the tariffs with a majority vote. They actually vote to take away their own powers. And so now you need 2/3 of Congress to take away the powers. And you have senators like Mike Lee, the Republican from Utah, who, when Biden was president, authored legislation to take back congressional tariff to take back tariff powers from the president. He had his own bill. He sought co-sponsors. We're going to take back the powers. Then when Trump got elected and abused the tariffs even more, Mike Lee not only did not reintroduce his legislation, he said he would vote against it if somebody else introduced it. That tells you where Congress is. The biggest advocates for taking away Biden's tariffs powers are now cheering Trump, abusing them even worse.
Yeah, we're so blinded by ideology. Like, I'll get into a question about DOGE next, but like, how do we get to the other side of this? Like, is it just going to be a collapse of the empire? Like, how do we, because it's untenable what's happening.
I wish I had a good answer to that.
Yeah,
I think
fair.
There's so many causes to it. I mean, a big cause of it is tribalism. When Republicans and Democrats live in entirely different worlds, they get their information from entirely different sources, entirely different news networks and blogs, and there's no misinformation fact-checking that pierces the bubble. It's really hard to get people to even look at the same universe together unless you have something cataclysmic happen. Unless if we have a really deep recession, an echo chamber can't spin gas prices. It can't spin egg prices, you're losing your job, your 401k cratering. That can pierce your bubble. But up until that point, I don't really know how to fix that.
Yeah. No, it's a massive issue. And to the point of DOGE, right? So DOGE came out, we're going to save $1 trillion. Now it's $150 billion. How are you thinking of this other part of the government that maybe, is run by the richest man in the world? There's a lot to say there, but what are you thinking of DOGE's actions?
It was originally $2 trillion. After the election, Musk said he was going to save $2 trillion. Now he scaled it down to $150 billion. By my estimates, they've saved about $5 billion, which is less than 0.1% of the budget. Moreover, the layoffs of the IRS tax enforcement employees is likely going to cost a lot of money to the IRS, which means when all is said and done, DOGE is probably going to end up expanding budget deficits. ultimately, DOGE is government spending cut theater. It's not actually meant to address spending because most of the spending goes to 6 items: Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, defense, veterans, and interest. That's 75% of the budget, and Trump doesn't want to touch it. So DOGE looks for MAGA cultural totems, DEI contracts, Politico subscriptions, federal employees, foreign aid, cuts that create maximum chaos and maximum pain for a lot of people, maximum consternation for non-MAGA voters, but don't actually save much money. So it's maximum pain and minimal savings. And that way, I think DOGE is ultimately theater. They're not serious. Elon Musk is just out there spreading misinformation about USAID conspiracies, about Social Security checks going to 150-year-olds. None of this is true. 1.5 billion condoms being sent to Gaza. That's not true. And ultimately, look, if you're going to cut the deficit, you got to do it the constitutional way, which is go through Congress. You cannot unilaterally cut spending without going through Congress. It's unconstitutional. So I think DOGE has been a bit of a fiasco. And I say this as a fiscal conservative who thinks there's a lot of ways to cut. They're not doing it. They're not serious.
Yeah. No, and they have they just seem to, again, like you said, cause max chaos. And it seems like the through line of this conversation is that Congress really needs to step up. Would you say that's the through line?
Yeah, I mean, Jonah Goldberg calls Congress a parliament of pundits.
Oh, jeez.
Meaning that members of Congress treat Washington policy like they're outsiders on the side, cheering or giving thumbs down. You know, you'll see when the president does something, members of Congress, Republicans will run to Fox News, a lot of Democrats will run to MSNBC, and they'll all comment on it like they're outside cheerleaders. What they won't do is actually go legislate. They barely ever pass budgets. They've deferred a lot of the budget power to the White House. They've deferred tariff power to the White House. Foreign policy and war making has had over decades Congress cut out of the process. They kind of see themselves as outsiders going on TV, giving speeches and cheering rather than actually doing their damn job and legislating. It's distressing.
It's horrible. And I guess that's a decent place to leave it. Is there anything else that you want to say about Congress? Like if you had to advise them, like what would you say? I know you've actually done this in the past, right?
I advise Congress regularly, and I try to tell them to think more about their legacy than the next election, which is, it's hard to tell members of Congress this. But I tell them, if you end up in a recession, if we end up in a depression, if we have a debt crisis because of the constant tax cuts and spending expansions, you may be having a great life now, but you're going to be looked back on by a lot of individuals, including your own future generations of your family, as a failed, lost opportunity for the country. And I want them to think bigger than winning the news cycle. I haven't had a lot of success with that argument.
Do you feel like there's anybody in Congress doing it right, like Bernie and AOC or anybody on the Republican side?
There aren't a lot of members. I mean, there's I don't want to name names because I don't want to leave anybody out. But the frustrating thing when I work with Congress again is they all agree with my critique. Okay. They agree that tariffs are a disaster. They agree that what we're doing on budget deficits and spending and tax cuts is going to lead to a crash. Republicans agree for the most part that Trump is doing a lot of damage. They all agree, but what they tell me is, Jessica, we can't say anything. You're totally right. We can't say anything. but I'm going to do what I can to make little tweaks around the margins, which is the best I can do. Like I said, I understand what they're saying, but it's not a profile in courage.
No, it's certainly not. Thank you so much, Jessica. This has been a very informative conversation, and I could ask a million more questions, but thank you. This has been wonderful.
Thank you very much. It's been fun, Kyla.